Welcome to In the Flow. Today we're joined by a true expert in the creative operations space, Kate Sullivan. She's a creative ops and leadership partner at Blum Consulting and the owner of Kate Sullivan Creative. She's been in the trenches leading creative ops for giants like Pandora and HubSpot, and she got a start in the high-pressure world of live radio. Kate, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Kate, just to start, we'd love to hear about your journey in creative ops, and even from live radio for that matter.
Yeah, it's interesting. I always say that I feel like I was doing creative operations for my entire career. It just got that name in around 2015. I started off in media, like you said, live radio. There's no better way to just have to figure out how to operate creatively and get things out the door. It's a completely different different scenario than what I, worked on later in my career, but it was a great way to start. I was producing live daily radio shows. We would be on the air from 12 to 3 p.m. every single Monday through Friday. Whatever you were ready with at 11:59, that's what you got. And we'd end at 3, start it all over again. So in terms of getting in a workflow and getting in something that could be nimble and quick and flexible and also having to just roll with the punches a little bit. It was a really great sort of first view into what production was gonna be like. I then moved into television from there, and I that's what got me out to California actually, was a job in television producing for Current TV, which was Al Gore's very short-lived
Oh
TV
yeah,
network. Very
yeah.
impactful at the time. It was one of my favorite jobs. We were putting short documentaries on the air. At this period of my career, I was working almost entirely in nonfiction media and documentary, which is really where my heart is from a content perspective. So that got me into video. I wasn't sure at the time where this whole radio world was going. We didn't have podcasts yet. There wasn't this whole other kind of, possibility. That's starting unclear, like, oh, is this a career? So I was like, I should expand. Let's get into video. Let's get into some other mediums. Obviously, the producing side expands significantly. There's a lot more to juggle, but a lot of the sort of creative operations tenants and how you're managing process and teams and deadlines and creatives and all of this really stays the same. So again, felt like a precursor to what I ended up doing more officially. So I started at Pandora in 2015, actually in audio production, and I was working on the content side. And I thought I was going to be, making audio content and branded content. And the way I remember it and the way that it really went is that we had a big reorg, like happens at major places, and all of a sudden it was we're going to bring everyone together. We weren't going to have these siloed teams anymore. It wasn't good. We were going to bring together design, audio, copy, video, dev, and I was gonna oversee what are we gonna call it? Let's see. I don't know, creative operations. We're like,
Brilliant.
we need a central spoke for this. We need everyone to be organized together. We can't have these silos. We can't have everyone doing process in a different way. Like we're all marching towards the same goal. We should be centralizing. We should be bringing this together. So that was the start of that. And I started running the creative operations team, really building it from scratch. And did that for about 10 years in-house places. I still do that now, obviously consulting as part of my work. But I built the creative operations team at Pandora. We were then acquired by SiriusXM. So the Pandora and the SiriusXM creative teams came together. So my role expanded to include SiriusXM creative operations. And then after that, I worked at HubSpot for 2 years.
How is it different with creative ops in Pandora slash Sirius XM and in HubSpot, which is probably more B2B?
Yeah, so it's what's fascinating is how strikingly similar it is. That no matter what the product is, obviously you're gonna tip a little bit more into, the things we're making are slightly different or are different. But the process behind the scenes is so similar. The pain points that people are having, the way that people work together, the way that workflows work best, the way people are doing review and approvals. It doesn't really matter if you're doing that for a B2B event or website or campaign, or if you're doing that for a music event or app
Yeah.
or social media campaign. I mean, like the behind the scenes inner workings. When I got to HubSpot, I was very curious. How was this going to feel? What was going to be different? And of course, there were some new words to learn. Um, just industries shift and they call things a little slightly different things. And,
Yeah.
I was not at all my background in documentary and media and television and all of this SaaS and B2B was like miles away from anything I'd ever thought I would be like near.
Yeah.
But the behind the scenes in my role and the setup of the team and what we needed to do and the problems we needed to solve, almost identical. It was fascinating how similar it was.
Obviously, one of the key pieces for a creative ops leader is to sort of bring order to chaos. In terms of challenges in running these creative ops teams, or what's been probably the most difficult or most biggest jobs you've had to undertake, especially starting the creative ops team at Pandora? I think that's quite unique.
Yeah, it's interesting. Even in that scenario where it was sort of starting the official team, the challenge, which I would say is the biggest challenge of all in general, is that you're still cobbling together groups of people who have gotten used to doing things in their own way. And it hasn't been done with intention. It hasn't been done um, well, usually, like, it would be a lot of times by the time a team gets to the point of realizing that they need creative operations, there's been a lot of scrappy stuff happening for a long time that needs to be brought together, and honestly, it's like I'm all for scrappy in certain scenarios, like, if it's a small enough team and a small enough company, or you just need to get something out the door really fast, sometimes you do need to, like, drop the rigid, sort of, like, overly rigid rules and just get shit
Yeah.
done. Sorry.
No, it's spot on. It's good that you said, because we are currently looking at our development process, because I see creative ops process, and we have our creative ops team and we run it as a Scrum team. We run Scrum in our development process, but there's just sometimes with some of the AI tools we're releasing now, we just want to move so quick. And now we're actually asking the question, what on that process can we break so we can just move a bit quicker, and what should stay in
Right.
place?
Like, and what's working and what's not, and what works for different types of projects, and how can you sort of be realistic about keeping the end goal in mind always? Like, what are we trying to do here? What are we trying to
Yeah.
get done? So, the challenge of starting these teams and or coming into a team that already existed is that you're having to work around habits that are already in place, some good, some not good. But people are usually not aligned on what's good and what's not good. So I end
Yeah.
up having to go in really as a mediator and be like, okay, I want to hear from everybody. I want to hear what's working and what's not. But if you tell me this is working and someone else over here tells me the same thing as their absolute nightmare, then we need to find a common ground. And so that's the hardest part is figuring out what to keep going with. And what to change and how to get people on board for the change and help them understand why the change is important because not everyone's going to get what they want. And I'm also not a fan at all of these kind of off the shelf methods. Like, never have I gone into a team, whether it's full time in house starting or consulting, and with my method. Like, I don't, people ask me that sometimes. They're like, "What's your method?" I'm like, "My method is to get to know the organization that
Yeah.
needs help and figure out their culture, figure out their product, figure out their size and their cadence and their timelines and everything." It's almost like there's not one thing off the shelf I'm going to give to you. I'm going to sort of cherry pick from a variety of things and make something that works because while there are, like we said, a lot of similarities between all these different teams, there's nuances to it. There's nuances to the type of company it is, to the type of people that are there, are where are they sitting, I mean, there's the list would be boring and long to ramble off, but there's a lot that needs to be taken into consideration, and that's the hardest part about coming in new to a place.
Yeah, and just seeing all the different, just the different ways it works. So, quick tips and trick, or one tip, or that people could take away. If they have a creative ops team, or they have a in-house sort of creative team, what's one thing that you think is pretty common and is like the lowest hanging fruit that they can just go and just do this one thing, and it'll make your life easier?
So one of the biggest hurdles and one of the first things that most teams need if it really is extremely chaotic is figuring out a centralized intake system of how work is getting done because what throws teams off the most is when what I call shoulder taps.
It is a great way of putting it. Yeah, I think it's a great way of describing it.
Yeah, because people will just I mean, our stakeholders or partners would just go to whoever they kind of know best or work with most recently. It could be a copywriter or a designer and just, like, slack them or walk over and ask for something, and that's when things fall off the rails because people are not in a position to necessarily know how to prioritize it, whether they have time for it. Nothing's ever one person either. Like our that's the stakeholders with things think like, "Oh, I just need this tile made," or "I just need this I'll just go to the designer." That's a design thing, but they don't realize that there's also generally like a copywriter and maybe an art director and other people involved in this. So, getting everything funneling through is really important. Some type of planning, um, is important so you have a sense of what's coming down the pipeline. That's very challenging. Some places
Yeah.
that's easier for than others. That usually needs some finessing depending on the company and how things are. And then the other big one I would say that's right up there with intake, once you can get the work coming in a clear way and get it assigned clearly, it's really who's involved, especially in the creative review and approval process. That's where projects can really blow up if there's too many cooks in the kitchen. So
Yeah.
figuring out who actually needs to have a say in what. Sometimes people wanna say, "Oh, we just need to find our one approver." It's like, well, there's really never one approver. Like, there's always, like, a manager that's looking over one piece of a design thing, and then there's a creative director that's gonna look at these things, and then there's the partner that's gonna make sure this is right, and then legal is gonna make sure you said the legal things right. So it's you're gonna have multiple approvers, but it
And it's
just
also
being
when they're
clear
gonna approve it. That's the other
when
key
are they
thing.
gonna approve
Because
it?
yeah,
Yeah, totally, like, having to kind of just
yeah.
redo work, doing it out of order, um, but it gets really tricky when people who are meant to approve one piece start weighing in on things that aren't really within
Yeah.
their world. That will cause a lot of friction and chaos as well. So, I would probably say that, yeah, streamlining review and approval roles and having centralized intake are the I'm gonna give you 2, 2 tips.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, so let's talk about the approval. I mean, did you maybe have an example of where, you know, things just went a little bit or wrong or a little bit a lot or wrong and what you sort of took away from that?
There's a lot of examples that come to mind. I think especially thinking back to my time at Pandora, because like we were saying earlier, so one of the main differences between working at a place like Pandora, which is for consumers, it's very public facing versus B2B, and also within the music space, is we had tons of extra layers of approvals that needed to happen in dealing with content licensing. We're dealing with artists, we're dealing with artist imagery, we're dealing with songs. How much of a song can we use? What is it cleared for? Our job in marketing would be to promote, obviously, different
Yeah.
albums, different playlists, and different events and things that were happening. So we had to be extremely careful about what artwork we were allowed to use, whether it was digital in our shoots for campaigns and advertising, at our events. And there was a couple times where maybe the creative vision and look and design and maybe even builds of things got a little ahead of the content licensing, and we would find out too late that there were certain
Yeah.
elements of an artist's likeness that were not approved to use. There are times where that would cause, like, a complete unraveling, and we'd have to really start start over in the design, and that's based on licensing. Like I was saying, it's, like, really being clear on, like, "Okay, we need licensing at the table very early on, looking at concepts to make sure that the art we're putting together is going to be legally approved." Whereas in other scenarios, the legal team or the content licensing team is looking at the fine print, or they're looking at they're not that it's not always just directly related to the actual design elements as it would be when you're dealing with artists and licensed materials. So that came up a few times.
It's an interesting example because we are currently doing, an audit of a website and image. I mean, it's been around now for 10 years. And like, okay, some of the licenses were lost in someone's email inbox who isn't with the company anymore and things like that. And now we're saying, okay, every proof we go through, if it's on the website or it's a public design, we need the license in the brief. So otherwise it's rejected. Yeah. I don't know how else. I mean, but it sounds like a minefield for Pandora to have managed.
Well, yeah, it just has that extra layer when you're dealing with celebrities and talent
Yeah.
and all that, but it comes up and you're right, it's like it's in any way, any kind of licensing, that's a really good idea to get it into the brief, to make sure that the assets that you're working with are approved, and then I know there's a lot of tools out there too that can do that and show. very clearly what's approved and what's not approved, but it's still really hard. There's still at the end of the day, it's still humans who are racing to the finish line and sometimes
Yeah.
missing steps and then sometimes redoing entire campaigns.
Yeah. And I mean, I think the other thing you were talking about approval, it's just sort of one of the last points is like this 11th hour feedback. And I think that's the other challenge people need to manage. It's, when senior leadership comes in or they maybe see things slow or think about it too late. So it's like, when do you involve leadership or, when's the right time?
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is where it's really important to be looking at the full process and make sure that you know that, okay, if your CMO needs to approve this, what is the right level of information they have along the way? Obviously, they're not going to be sitting in every project meeting. They do not want to be in every email. They don't want to be probably in your Slack channels, you know? So what is the right amount of information? And again, there's not one answer to this. It depends on the size of the team. It depends on the personality of your CMO. Like, are they really hands-on? What do they like to see? Do they get into the weeds of the creative part? Or do they not, I mean, so
Yeah.
that's where, again, creative operations and whoever's running that project, whether it's a producer or project manager, depending on the type of project, needs to understand the nuances of the personalities at play and what's gonna be expected and make sure they do have the right visibility. Because what ends up happening is if they wait until the very end and they haven't been getting the views they need along the way, it can kind of come as a shock. The feedback can cause the project to backpedal a bit. I think it also matters a lot in those scenarios how the feedback sessions are facilitated. Again, like what is it that each person is being asked to provide feedback on? Of course, if you're dealing with like the execs, um, that can be a well-intentioned plan, but not always play out because you sort of are gonna listen and want to do what they say.
Yeah. So something I find useful personally when I'm reviewing marketing content that the team's working on is that when I look at what the previous versions were, I can see the feedback the team's given because it gives me the story of how we got to where we are. And it's hard for creative ops teams and creatives to sometimes relay that information. So I think just having a system where you can see all the versions, see what the team's been working on, and you can sort of, it's easier to empathize than like, okay, this is where they came from and this is why it's like it is. I think to me that's important for
That's
leadership.
great. I love that. That's a great tip.
So there's tools, and yeah, we sort of talk about people and so on, but obviously, a major trend is AI, and we're all looking at how we incorporate that, how we use it, and so on in our systems. But what are some of the good and the mistakes that you see people are using today, to roll out AI within their processes and teams?
Yeah, it's interesting. Felt like a couple years ago, there was a lot of pressure for teams to use AI so that they could say they were using AI. Like, it was almost an optics thing. It was like, "Yeah, sure, also we wanna be more efficient and we wanna figure out what these tools can do," but it felt like the driving force for a lot of organizations was to be able to just simply say, "We're using AI," that was gonna show
Yeah.
their relevancy, that was gonna show they were ahead, and so that caused a lot of confusion for teams because there's a big difference between wanting a headline and then also wanting something that is going to work within the teams and going to be serving the teams. So I saw a lot of disconnect in teams during that period where there was a lot of scrambling and there was a lot of disconnect between what's actually going to work versus kind of shoehorn it and make it work so we can say it works. That was challenging for a lot of places. I do think that a lot of people rose to the occasion and just sort of got together and said like, "Okay, how can we be piloting multiple things at once? How can we find the people within these teams that love these tools, that are researching this?" Because the challenge with AI is staying on top of it. I mean, it is such a
Yeah, it's so
fast-moving
many tools.
train.
Yeah.
There's so many things and there's so many updates all the time, and now even more so, now we're just inundated by so many options, and then you have, are you getting a new tool or are you waiting to see if your current tools are going to, add features? And it's a lot for people to manage. I think the people who did it most successfully had a healthy relationship with what are the goals of this and what are the optics and how can we make sure that we're moving fast and experimenting and maybe breaking things a little bit, but not burning our entire teams out and wasting time and money. Um, And also finding those people that are sitting within organizations. This is where something I've been thinking about a lot lately is, yes, we have our titles and we have our org structures and we have the places where people sit, but there's so much talent and there's so much skill and knowledge that is sometimes just one level below the surface. And I think with AI, we really saw that come to light where it was like, so and so, like, I don't, whatever example, like the person you would not expect to be
Yeah, comes up with something
really deep
cool.
in
Yeah.
and staying on top of this, new
Yeah.
shifts in the industry, all of a sudden, like, get that person on the pilot team, get them in the mix because they're like living and breathing this, even though it's not their job title necessarily. So I think that that was really interesting to see and something that we can learn from moving forward. These days, now, one of the challenges is teams who are intimidated by it. Teams who think that it's gonna be because I think what we've seen now is that, like, AI doesn't have to be this massive shift, like, you don't have to, like, flip everything upside down and start over again, it's like, you can do small things here and there using AI that are really accessible and easy and attainable. I mean, the amount of people who are just simply using ChatGPT or their enterprise version of ChatGPT to speed up their brainstorming process or fix their grammar or whatever, and, like, I think that there's still a mindset that some organization has that it has to be this big shift and it has to be this big overwhelming thing, especially in certain industries that maybe aren't as tech forward. Like if you're working in finance, then you're probably not gonna be one of those industries that wants to take big swings into AI because there's a certain level of trust that and a different kind of level of trust that your brand is built on. Um but there's little things teams can do. So I think the challenge now has shifted where it's like, what are the easy entry ways that some teams that are still overwhelmed by it or intimidated by it or feel like they don't have the budget or the right roles or whatever? It's like, well, what could they be doing? Because there are little things that you could be doing with it. Personally, I'm a big fan of finding ways to increase the efficiency of the workflows. I'm not as excited about AI doing voiceover work or, like, replacing
Mm.
designers or photographers, like, I'm, like, a creative person through and through, I like making things, I people like making things, like, it makes me sad to think that there'll be roles that will be eliminated where people are like, "You never have to make that again," and I'm like, "Wait, but, like, the creative,
It's
the
actually
true
feels
artist
like a
and the
bad
creative,
thing. Yeah.
that's the fun part."
Yeah.
Like, people like making things, like, we enjoy that, and so it's like, I'm kind of more like, how can we speed up our systems and make, certain things better and speed up the systems for the designers and the photographers and the writers and everybody, but, I'm not in the camp of, like, let's make
Yeah.
campaigns entirely with AI and, like, pat ourselves on the back.
Yeah, I think so. How we've been using it on the creative side is the team has been starting to introduce some effects, and it's more for the social posts and so on. It actually makes it quite funny in a way. So we have this one video where we talk about your review process doesn't need to be electrifying or whatever, and then creative team used whatever nano or whatever tool they used, and actually like it made person presenting like looks like she's being electrified and so on. It's brilliant, and
Fun.
they did
That's
it
fun,
in a
yeah.
few minutes. So that's good. And I think like if it's an add-on, yeah, okay, let's level it. And I think that's sort of where you want to see it go. Is like, okay, we've got the baseline. Some of the yeah, like you said, ChatGPT emails and so on can be a little bit quicker. And then okay, but how do we level up the creative? So can we go the next layer up? And I think that's hopefully it gives us time to go and do that stuff now.
Yeah, that's fun. That feels like a fun use of it. Yeah.
I mean, there's always we talk about process, people, and then the actual tools. When you go in with a client, I mean, what's the first thing you look at? I mean, where's the biggest sort of challenges you see normally?
The challenges, I feel like there's a list of challenges, and people are generally gonna have 2 or 3 major challenges on the list. It's gonna be these days especially, how can we do more with less? We've gone through layoffs, we have less people, we have less budget, but we're expected to make more work. That is a big challenge that a lot of teams are facing. My main thing is to go in and really just do discovery with the clients and figure out, like, what caused you to reach out to need help? You know what I mean? At this point, it's like there was
Mm,
something that triggered you to need help. Sometimes it's because Um, they've had a major reorganization, or they've, like I said, gone through layoffs and everything's kind of up in the air and changed. Um, Other times it's a scaling moment. So like they've gone from being a smaller team where they can get away with being a little bit scrappier to being that slightly bigger, medium to larger size where they need a little bit more help and structure. I mean, my first step with any team that I'm going to be working with, and this is the same as when I was working full time in house places or if I'm consulting on teams now, is to get a sense of what is working along with what isn't. I'm a big fan of working with people's strengths, and so oftentimes when people are coming to me in a variety of settings, it's like the laundry list of things that are going wrong and the laundry list of pain points, and bring those. I want those. I want that list. But I also want to hear what's going well. Because if we can fix the problems based on habits and models that this team already is aligned around and has some buy-in around, then we should leverage that. That's an important piece of the puzzle I think that sometimes gets missed in more traditional approaches. It reminds me a little bit of parenting in the sense, like the parenting approach and being like, instead of like reprimanding the kid for everything they're doing wrong all the time, like you also need to praise them when they're doing the good things so they
Yeah.
know to keep doing the good things. It's like, don't forget to like boost people up and say when things are going well and, like, call out the awesome stuff. Because not only does that go a long way for morale and everything else and making people feel good, but it also is, like, those are your clues into what's the path of least resistance here, you know?
Yeah, but it's a good way of putting it. I mean, I remember Rackspace back in the day, and it's a long time ago now. They used Strengths Finder. So they had on their wall in the office, they had everybody's like photo, and then I think it's like two or three of their strengths below each person. And it was all about you're going to get more out of making people's strengths stronger versus making their weaknesses better, which
100%.
I
I
really
love
liked
them.
as a concept.
I like the idea of making that information accessible to people as well, and to kind of demystifying it, like you're saying, having it up and having it available for people. That's something I've seen work really well for teams, who are learning to collaborate better, is really understanding what people's different natural personalities, like DISC is another one that gets used a lot. That again, like I don't think that everyone should just be showing up and doing work exactly how they want. Like, I'm not going to be like, okay, I'm a morning person. So, like, all my team meetings now are going to be
Yeah.
happening at 7 a.m. Like, you don't, that's not how it is. But to know what everybody's sort of natural inclination is and where their strengths are within their natural inclination, and then know how much everyone kind of has to adjust to come together and make something productive for the group. It's like being able to know that about each other goes a really long way, and can
Yeah.
really help with collaboration. I've seen this a lot with people that are having friction or not really kind of communicating well, and they all of a sudden realize, like, oh, well, because like you're more of a really want like all the information and you need to know that like everything's been thoroughly researched and you need to sit with something and think with something. Whereas I'm more of like a let's brainstorm on the spot and get ideas out and talk fast and all this stuff. And you realize, like, oh, neither's right or wrong, but that's just an awareness you have to have in order to make this collaboration work, and it goes a long way.
I know you're speaking at Creative Operations Summit in LA in November, and that's a little bit about scale as well and AI speed. Anything, any sort of insights you want to share, to the audience, potentially if they're going to be at the summit?
Yeah, so, the Henry Stewart Creative Operations Summit, this is happening in Los Angeles on November 13th. It's a full day. There's incredible programming. There's talks, there's panels. There's a lot of major brands that are going to be represented from like Nordstrom and NASA and Discord. I've been doing these conferences since around 2018. And it's just a great community. It's a great place to go and realize like, everybody has the same problems as you.
Yeah.
And it's going to be okay. Get some great ideas, hang out with some cool people. So this year I'm actually moderating a panel. And the title of it is Between Metrics and Magic, which I just love.
Oh,
Um,
that's interesting. Yeah.
feel like that is the essence of what creative operations is how to kind of strike that balance between the creative magic and the creative process and how ideas are coming to life and how we're maneuvering, within these spaces, but also just like you got to be able to explain what it is. You've got to be able to like have the numbers to back it up. and the timelines and the this and the that. So it's really about from a philosophical perspective and a workflow perspective, how do you approach that? From a tools perspective, obviously it gets into AI as well. I'll be really curious to hear what the panelists bring to the table, but I think it's a very relevant topic, especially right now where we are seeing so much out there that is like in appreciation for creativity and wanting creativity to thrive, especially as we see AI kind of threatening that a bit in certain spaces. So there's a bit of a resurgence happening, which is like creativity is important. Like, don't let it die. Don't let it go. Like, this is so important. And also, how do we make this happen within an organization that does need to deliver at scale, on time, on budget, hitting the goals, you know? And so it feels very relevant always, but especially now, and I think it'll be a great discussion.
That's great.
Yeah.
And you've seen this field evolve, so much. Um, where do you see creative ops going in the future? And what should leaders be thinking about, and how they prepare for what's next?
Yeah, I think about this a lot, and actually with Blum, we talk about this a lot and have been doing more thought leadership around this as well on LinkedIn and other places, and the biggest thing that I'm seeing and calling out now is well, it's sort of 2 things that are related, but it's just being more nimble, being more flexible on how we approach things, being less siloed and rigid. Creative operations sometimes swings too far into like the process and the rules. And like, it's just kind of like, what are the rules? And you have to do things a certain way. And that's just not always how things are going to get done best. People need some room to move and be flexible. The work is constantly changing. I see a lot of teams that get really, fixated on wanting to kind of categorize everything and make sure everything's clear and make sure we know exactly what the work's going to be exactly at this time. And then what happens? Like you change course every week,
Yeah.
month, year. It's like, how can you be nimble? That doesn't mean that there's not clear roles and that there's not centralized visibility. Sometimes people hear me say that and they're like, kind of think like, oh, we're going back to this sort of free for all scrappiness. That's not what I'm saying. There's an in between. I think sometimes teams and creative operations teams specifically can swing a little too far over to the rigid, and we need to kind of get the pendulum into the middle. Another sort of offshoot of that is this whole debate between are we an in-house team or are we using an agency? Do we outsource or do we in-house? Like that's done. That debate didn't serve anybody because the truth is you need it all. Usually. Most teams need it all. And they need it all
Yeah.
strategically and they need it all intentionally and stop sort of, pitting teams against each other even within internal teams. You have your oftentimes places are set up where you have your sort of centralized internal creative team, but then you might have a social media team that has people that write and design things and make social videos. That's kind of a different sort of skill set. They don't necessarily sit on the creative team, but they're making creative.
Yeah.
So they're creative.
Yeah, we see that a lot happening where social sits separate because they don't want to it needs to be a lot quicker in terms of their response and so on.
It needs to be a different process, and so but how to not have that
Mm,
turn into a us versus them debate and or
yeah.
a siloed situation? Because you can still share with each other and learn from each other, but you don't necessarily have to be sitting on the same teams. So, like and this is a change for me, like, I used to be a big advocate for centralized creative, like, that is how I built my previous teams, that is how I thought it should be. I think that served us well in the beginning when we were sort of doing that cleanup, being like,
Mm,
"Okay, everything's a mess, like, we gotta bring everyone
yeah,
together, figure
let's
out
get
what's
our
going
hands
on here,
around this.
we have to see it all, we have to get our hands around this," but the more I did that and the more I saw then how also the work has changed, the speed has changed, there's now skill sets that crop up on different teams. I think now my perspective on it has evolved as the industry has evolved, which is have the knowledge of where all these skills are and how everyone's doing things. Have that knowledge. Don't have it be a siloed kind of thing, but it doesn't really matter who you report into at the end of the day.
Yeah, and I was just going to say, I think it's almost like the creative team being able to give the social media team the tools in order so they can go do that. So whether it's templates or some rule sets or whatever, so they can move fast. And I think it's not just the creative, but it's also like how can we take that and go deploy that quicker?
Exactly, and how to like, approach it more to, like, how do we help each other? What ended up happening because of this the divisiveness in the debates that were happening, and I see this with external agencies and in-house teams as well, is like they get pitted against each other. So they're not helping each other all of a sudden. It's like there's all these handoffs or there's all this competition around who gets to work on what, or no, that's mine. No, that's yours. No, like it's not serving the work in the end. And we're
Yeah.
missing opportunities to bring people together and help each other as opposed to focusing all this time and energy trying to argue over where something should sit. It's like, well, let's change
Yeah.
that conversation and talk about what's the best way for this thing to get made. Who's best to make it? Okay, cool. Like, let's make an intentional decision and make sure that everyone involved, again, back to the role clarity piece, like knows where they sit. So I think the paradigm shift is it's really about knowing your full organization and knowing and I think that's what creative operations should be doing now is being that global view. They always needed to be that, but being that global view in a different way, which is like you're staffing a project because that's hopefully your creative operations is in charge of your intake and your resourcing. Like, please let that be the case. But you don't necessarily need to just be looking at your one tiny little team to see how this is best gonna get done. Like,
Yeah.
have your global view of where talent sits across the entire in-house organization and also externally with your vendors and agencies. I think that's gonna be a really important piece of being more nimble in the future.
That's brilliant. Well, thank you so much. This has been incredibly insightful. It's clear that this whole operations doesn't need to be a barrier to actual good creative. And I think you've given us some really good insights of where we are today and where we're going. And just before we go, where can listeners learn more about you and about the work you do and get in touch?
Yeah, so I am on LinkedIn, Kate Sullivan Creative. I have a website, katesullivancreative.com. I also work for my larger scale consulting, through Blum Consulting Partners, which is also on LinkedIn and has a website. And I'd love to hear from people. I love talking about this and connecting with people. So that's where they can find out more about not only my creative operations work, but also some of the work I'm doing around creativity in general, and some one-on-one work I do with leaders and people in the industry.
Brilliant. Sounds fantastic. Thank you so much, Kate. It was so nice chatting to you today.
It was great talking with you. Thank you.
I'm sharing insights from around the marketing, tech, and operations industries on how marketing and creative teams can get more done together.